Don't you already know who the murderer is?
You've probably seen a story like Nobody Wants to Die before. James is a detective with a tragic past he doesn't remember, and he drowns himself in booze to dull the pain. When he's pulled into a case that ends up being bigger than he could have ever imagined, both his will and his skills as a detective are put to the test. That setup and the world around it might be familiar, but its relatively brief runtime is also filled with fun details and a few moments that flip your expectations. There's a bit too much hand-holding during its investigations, and its branching story structure isn't easy to explore, but what Nobody Wants to Die lacks in polish, it makes up for in style.
Almost got us.
Did it work? Did they take the bait?
Bait? Did you call in a fake burglary?
Uh-huh. It was all I could think of.
Nobody Wants to Die is a cyberpunk neo-noir with plenty of clear influences. It's a little bit Altered Carbon, a little bit Dark City, and a little bit Cyberpunk 2077. Of course, there's also the early 20th century detective noir of it all, complete with femme fatales, constant rain, lots of alcohol, and monologues from James that straddle the line between perfectly melodramatic and a bit too over the top.
Okay, James. I'm no expert, but the universe seems to be telling you to go home.
This mystery introduces a surprisingly detailed world in a hypothetical 24th century New York that's filled with flying cars, giant holographic ads, and buildings so tall you can't see the ground. Here, people can swap bodies after death, or just whenever they want. This system seemingly allows for immortality, but only if you're wealthy enough to purchase a subscription for it when you come of age. It's a very eat the rich story, although that class warfare setup is mostly just used to move the plot along.
You get excited when you do something illegal.
I'm in rehab, so don't tempt me.
Despite taking a lot of its elements from other places, developer Critical Hit Games has added a lot of its own unique details. We've seen body swapping in cyberpunk fiction before, but this system really digs into the disadvantages of getting a new body that was addicted to drugs or has allergies. It's also hilarious that James's apartment building is such a shithole that he has to summon a shared bathroom to use, which leads to a hilarious interaction with a neighbor who was still bathing.
Did you hear? He signed it. That lying piece of shit.
There are also tiny aesthetic details that don't make much sense, like how many locks require you to input a numbered code with a rotary dial. Why is a world in the 24th century not utilizing computers more? How is James able to find a drive-in theater that plays nearly 400-year-old black and white movies? These odd tidbits are all in service of the compelling atmosphere, and it's super easy to accept them when you can tell that Critical Hit Games is having a lot of fun just putting anachronisms together in new ways.
You know, it's hard enough to imagine driving on the ground and all, but 120? No, I call bullshit on that one.
The setting and world-building pieces pay homage to film noir, but that doesn't mean it's held on a pedestal. Many of James's monologues and musings are poetic and corny, and sometimes characters call him out on it, especially his partner, Sarah, who is a great foil for James as she talks him through the case and his thoughts through a receiver in his ear.
If you look at the pieces of the puzzle carefully, there's something about everyone that doesn't fit.
He's the kind of guy who sits on neon signs outside his apartment on the 500th story of a building, drinking or smoking as a melodramatic loner, and Nobody Wants to Die takes every opportunity to make fun of him for that.
Desperate struggle that even green is eventually lost.
This combination of new and old creates a pulpy mix of scenes that can swing wildly between depressive retrospection, outright tragedy, and self-aware nonsense, and it all somehow never feels out of place. In fact, its dedication to that tonal dissonance is largely what lets it stand out despite its very obvious homages.
Is it a real scotch?
Are you crazy? Go!
The actual gameplay is split into two parts. The first is the dialogue system, where you can make decisions that impact later events. With multiple dialogue paths to choose from in most conversations, you can either take a serious route during your investigation or go for the stupid answer. That could mean listening to your corrupt police chief boss or ignoring him and stealing evidence. You are welcome to play things straight, but choosing the sillier options can create hilarious moments, like having to describe chocolate to Sarah in some unfortunate ways.
Okay, emotions. Let's see. It's dark, bitter, and warm.
The second part is the investigation. This is mostly detective work, which involves surveying a crime scene, gathering evidence, using futuristic tech to reconstruct gruesome, gory murders so they play out in front of your eyes, and then putting all the clues together.
Did Green try to crack open that plate with his own forehead? Or did somebody else use Green's forehead like a ball-peen hammer?
How your gadgets work is a bit confusing at first, but by the end of the first case, you fall into a routine. Use the reconstructor to reconstruct events, fast forward or rewind through the three-dimensional footage to find evidence or leads, analyze those pieces, and then pull out your supplementary UV light and X-ray to dig a little deeper.
Well, I can see you're having a great time.
It seems simple enough, and it is. Especially because there are very few instances where you go about it on your own. You'll usually get a prompt or a piece of dialogue that tells you exactly what to do, which tool to use, and how to think. You're very much dragged through the story and forced to watch it play out instead of doing your own detective work, which removes any sense of accomplishment. You click things in the correct order, and then you're done. Even putting the clues together for analysis is basic. All of the data you gather will be presented on an evidence board where you can draw conclusions, but you'll be told outright if you're guessing right or wrong.
The sequence of events worries me.
The choice to remove all your agency during these investigation phases does at least allow you to experience the story more closely, since you don't have to worry about actually solving a case yourself. That's especially true in how certain events impact each other to create more conversation options, but the rigid structure does also lessen the impact of your investigation quite a bit and how much you can actually do.
Maybe I'll just let sleeping dogs lie.
Thanks. My blood pressure didn't need to get any higher.
Thankfully, the dialogue system is worth paying attention to. It's not the most robust around, but there's enough choice that you feel like you have a semblance of control over James and his actions. His core personality never changes, but you can decide whether he answers Sarah honestly about evidence he chose to steal from a crime scene, drinks and drives, complies with the police, or even shoots somebody.
I'm sitting on the crapper at home. Want more detail? Because I can give you more detail.
How impactful your choices are varies, and there are multiple endings despite the story always arriving at the same tense confrontation, but Nobody Wants to Die understands that it's about the journey. The final payoff is also satisfyingly dark, letting you ruminate on your choices, sometimes to the point of absolute despair. This mystery will go there, and even if you made all the correct choices, it might break your heart.
What about evidence analysis?
You got evidence illegally, and you want to put it in an official report?
If you're invested enough to see all the different outcomes, you can start again on a new save file, but Critical Hit Games didn't make it easy to run through a second time. While not giving you the option to manually save is a great way to make you sit and think about the consequence of each choice, it does make it quite difficult to see everything. There isn't a New Game Plus or chapter select after your first playthrough, and if you want to fast forward through conversations, you only have the option to spam a skip button, which you have to click for each line of dialogue, and you can't skip cutscenes at all. So if you want to experience the different endings, you'll pretty much just have to play through the entire campaign again.
We have to get to him.
The decision not to include these replayability features is an interesting one, as many branching narrative games want you to feel the weight of your choices, but also give you the opportunity to change them. It feels like there should be an option to help speed up additional playthroughs after the first at the very least.
Nobody'll even know I was here.
Granted, Nobody Wants to Die is only 5 or 6 hours long, and depending on the ending you get, there's plenty of motivation to hop back in. If you get the worst possible ending, you might want to see some alternatives, or just anything that doesn't make you feel so dreadful. Starting from scratch isn't a total slog either, since you can make some new choices that unlock conversations or pay off differently. None of the endings are perfect, though. James's story is about a past that slowly emerges to haunt him, and your player's skills aren't going to stop his bittersweet conclusion.
I leave the body of a dead god on the flaming Mount Olympus.
Nobody Wants to Die's relatively brief story isn't completely original, but it has a cool mix of inspirations and unique world-building touches that all work together to create something new and engaging. It holds your hand a bit too much for a game about the art of investigation, but its conversation system picks up the slack with humor, unexpected outcomes, and a surprisingly deep story about how your past can be your present even when you're facing immortality. For more, check out our reviews of Still Wakes the Deep or Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, and for everything else, stick with IGN.